In the last 50 years, over $1.2 trillion of aid money has been poured into Africa, more than the entire GDP of countries like Spain, Australia, or South Korea. When all of this began, just 11% of Africa lived in poverty. But by the 1990s, after floods of money and global campaigns, that number had actually increased to 66%, and today it stands at 38%. Over 3 times higher than when the aid program started. And to be fair, by the 1960s there was a good reason to think this. The one major incident where it had been tried, it worked remarkably well. After World War II, Europe was left decimated, and all of this came with a massive geopolitical risk. Across Western Europe, communist parties were quickly gaining popularity, and there was a real risk that without a strong economy, Western Europe could turn to communism, or worse, be invaded by the Soviet Union. For the US, this would have been a disaster. So in 1947, the government announced one of the most ambitious economic programs in human history, the Marshall Plan. Between 1948 and 1952, the US pumped over $13 billion into Europe, roughly $160 billion in today's money. The idea was that by providing Europe with large amounts of cash, America could kickstart investment in the economy. And surprisingly, it worked. In the decade after the Marshall Plan, GDP per capita across the region grew by almost 35%. For the Western world, this was a massive success. But for America, it also represented a turning point. At the time, the continent was still reeling from centuries of colonialism. In 1960, the average income in sub-Saharan Africa was less than $150 a year, and literacy rates were under 30%, with life expectancy hovering around 45 years. So the money started flowing. In the 1960s, sub-Saharan Africa was receiving $500 million in aid every year. But by the 1990s, that number had increased 40 times to almost $20 billion. Africa quickly became the most aid-dependent region on Earth. But despite this massive injection of cash, things were actually getting worse. In fact, from 1970 to 2000, the average income in Africa declined, despite receiving almost $600 billion over this time period. In 2005, the UN launched the Millennium Development Goals, and the G8 promised to double aid to Africa, with the end of aiming poverty by 2030. This wasn't just a government strategy anymore, it had become a public movement. Campaigns like Comic Relief in the UK, Live Aid, and Band-Aid's Feed the World turned Africa into a moral crusade. Ordinary citizens were donating millions, schools held fundraisers, and celebrities sang charity singles, all under the belief that sending money would fix the problem.